Gary Gulman, congratulations! You're about to release your HBO special,
Yes, James.
The Great Depresh.
Yes.
And do you mind if I give a little intros? But this is the fourth time on this podcast. The first time we didn't know each other, and I was just simply a huge fan. I'd watched
Right.
like every YouTube clip 10
Yes.
times. I could recite your jokes and comedy to my friends. And you came to the studio, and I hope you don't mind me saying, you were really quiet.
Yeah.
Like you could barely talk louder
Yeah.
than a whisper.
Right.
And I finally asked you about it on the podcast, and you started talking to me about your depression.
Right.
And fast forward another year, we did a podcast about one of your jokes in particular, the abbreviated states.
Right.
And even when I felt bad, like even when I told you what the topic of that podcast was, you were like, "Ugh, I'm never gonna write anything better." Like
Right.
you were, and then we had lunch the next day, and the next day after that, you were going to essentially quit comedy and move back to your mom's house
Right.
in Boston and be
Yes.
a camp counselor.
Yes.
Like, and here I couldn't believe it, like this huge talent. And you, at that point, I think you really didn't know what was going to happen next.
Right. I was really sick. So the story in joke form, as well as documentary, is premiering Saturday night, October 5th at 10 p.m. So I wanted to get that plug in first. But I do remember how sick I was, and it feels so good to be able to come back in such a better space where I feel I'm myself, and I'm able to reflect on these things with some perspective and bring some light to it, and also lightness.
So I want to ask you about what happened that summer, because you came back firing. Like
Yes.
between sets that I saw you do and your writing on Twitter, the Gulman tips, which are like
Right.
the most amazing tips on
Oh,
comedy I've
thank
ever
you.
seen. Like the only reason I log into Twitter now is to look
Oh,
for your
wow. Oh,
tips.
that's what a
So
great compliment.
and because they're so valuable, not just for comedy writing, but for writing and art. Like
I
it's
hope
really
so.
valuable advice about creativity. And and then of course you teamed up with a little known producer named Judd Apatow to make
Right.
an amazing. I watched the taping of it, an amazing special, which is appearing on HBO on Saturday, October 5th, 10 p.m. And they call it The Great Depresh. And I watched it, and it was I like all my neurons were firing watching you on the stage, because I was thinking to myself, man, he was a great writer of all these jokes, like the abbreviated states, all your jokes about Trader Joe's, grapefruit, uh, uh, hockey. That one was in the. I won't give a spoiler, but
Right.
uh, uh, but then I was amazed. Like it was like a whole evolution in your writing to take this skill and apply it. It's very hard to take autobiographical stories, I think, and make them funny, because in your head there's
Right.
all this story. Like you're seeing a
Right.
vision that the audience is not, because you're seeing the full 4D reality of it.
Right.
To chop that down and put in punchlines and take out all the fat is got to
Right.
be difficult. So
Well, I think one thing that occurs to me is that when you first start to write comedy, you have these stories that you've told in your life, and you try to put them on stage, and you realize that it doesn't work the same as when you're telling the stories in the other context, which is your life. So I think
why is that? Why doesn't it work?
I have no idea. I have no idea. But part of it is that you don't have the skill yet to write for the stage. And so a lot of people give up and say, I'll just write things that are outside me, and I'll make observations, and I'll adjust my whole act so that I don't have to rely on my own story. So I think part of it is that you need a certain skill to be able to write autobiographical jokes and make them funny, and make them work for the stand-up setting. But also what happened was, over the 25 years that I did comedy, I cultivated, I guess, or was lucky enough to draw a certain audience that was on the same wavelength as far as my humor and my delivery and my speed and pace. And so I've been thinking about this a lot recently. And this was definitely the case. I couldn't do the Great Depression material everywhere. I couldn't do it on a Saturday night at the Comedy Cellar when they're there to see people just killing, and the people who went on before you did incredible shows, and then you're gonna go down and say, hey, I was in the psych ward and I got recognized in the psych ward, and talk about that. So if I only had comedy clubs and bar shows to run my set at, I never would have gotten the confidence to do it. But luckily I had this audience that probably started to coalesce, maybe partly from that joke we talked about, the abbreviated states, and maybe partly from some of the specials I had on Netflix. But I got to maybe a tipping point, or a position where I could fill 300 to 1,000 seats in most cities in America, and those people had the same sense of humor as me. They all found me very funny. So I was able to have some leeway and some patience from the audience in talking about these things. And like we were talking off air, the feedback I got after the shows was different from any of the feedback that I had ever gotten in my career. And it was clear that the people were hungry for this type of act, that they wanted to hear about depression and anxiety, and they wanted to hear about my treatment and my recovery, and they were so grateful. And again, if I hadn't gotten that kind of feedback, if I had alienated people, and there were people who came up to me afterwards and said, that was too dark. That was too dark. And luckily I had some people around me, my manager and the director of the special, who I told them what the comments were. And they said, in one case, they said, well, what did the other people say? And I told them, and they said, well, just listen to them. And that was what kept me going, because I'm incredibly sensitive, and I don't want to, I would never have wanted to lose the audience I had already built by going too far away from what was acceptable to them. So
So
I was very fortunate.
so there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
But like in the first thing you mentioned was that it's you know, initially people try to do these autobiographical pieces. It doesn't seem to quite work. I wonder if the reason is, like, when you tell the story to your friends and they laugh, that's because they're your friends. They
Right.
know the background.
Yes.
They know
You're
the four
comfortable, You're
dimensions.
confident.
Yeah.
You're not
And they know you.
memorized. It's also conversational.
Yeah.
That's one of my biggest tips I give to comedians who are starting out. You need to be conversational now. The alt comedy movement in the 90s wiped out all the schmaltz and the prepared delivery that was so hot in the 80s.
Yeah, like, I think people don't want to see an act. Like,
Yes.
adults don't wanna see other adults trying things. They wanna see
Yeah.
a professional talking to
Yes.
them, making interesting observations, touching
Yes.
them, and then making
Yes.
them laugh,
Yes.
and touching them,
Right.
mentally.
Right.
And the other thing is, like you mentioned, when you just go into a room full of strangers and say, "I'm depressed, just came back from living in my mom's house,"
Yeah.
they if they're strangers, and half of them might be tourists from other countries, they don't they're paying money. They wanna see,
Yeah.
Jerry Seinfeld, a successful
Yes.
comedian.
Yes.
They don't wanna see, this
Yes.
guy just was sleeping in his mom's house. Like,
Yes.
they
Yes.
so there's that aura. And like you say, a lot of the comedians, they go up on there, they're fast, they're funny, they're a roller coaster ride,
Yeah.
and it's different paces.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, pacing, cadence, timing. Yours is, of course, funny from years ago.
Right.
But I think that's part of it also. And again, it's hard to know. I think when you're telling a story, different things might be important to you than was important to the audience. So,
Right.
like what you say, that people were coming up to you. What you instead, no one's going to come up to you after one of your older jokes and say, "Man, that thing about grapefruits, that really struck home. I had a
Yes.
cancer the size of a
Exactly.
grapefruit also, and I never thought of it that way."
Yes.
But with depression, there's like 40 million people in the US clinically
Right.
depressed. I've suffered from it. You've obviously been through it very recently, and
Yes.
came out the other side. And I think this is something people want to talk about. And when they see a performer talking about it, it gives them permission to feel like, oh, it's okay. This guy just made me feel. Not only did he make me laugh, he made me feel okay.
Yes.
But the final thing I want to unpack there is that it takes one person out of 100 to ruin the feeling for you.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was one show, and I talked about it last night on Seth Meyers, which I'm sure you DVR'd, but there was
I watched it this morning on
oh, you
YouTube.
did? Oh, okay. There was
I didn't listen to it with my bass boost on the Sony Walkman. See?
So there was one man in Delaware who was just so angry about the performance I was giving, and 70 minutes into a 90-minute show, he started to clearly become upset, and I asked him if everything was okay, and he said, what is this, therapy? Don't you have anything lighter? And I said, I thought that the name The Great Depresh would have clarified it to everyone, and that the other people seemed to be enjoying it. He says, "You suck," and then he walked out. And for the first time in my career, I got a standing ovation before the show ended. The people were so supportive and overrode his veto in such a dramatic and substantial way. But it still stung me. It really did, because it's it's not good if something is for everyone, but you still there's a part of my I don't know whether it's my ego or just my sensitivity that wants to be for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's a natural thing.
Yeah.
Even though so many creatives have said for almost centuries,
Yes.
a third will like you, a
Yes.
third don't care, and a
Right.
third will hate you.
Right.
We've been warned.
I know.
Since
That's
Mozart, we've been warned.
That's so true. Yeah.
And so just as a brief story, last night I was giving a live podcast downstairs. A friend of mine just wrote an excellent book, and some woman stood up at the end and basically said, "You can't use your book platform to say that opinion.
Oh,
Like,
gosh.
people think differently. It's inappropriate what you said in your book." And he said, "That's the definition of a book, for me to say my opinion."
Yes.
So he dealt with it very well. Like, I felt like
Right.
he was very healthy in
Right.
dealing with it. But I think I'm like you, one thing, and that's what I'm showing to everybody. Look what this
Yeah.
person said, and
Yeah.
how many other letters did you get? Oh, 1,000, but they
Right.
don't count.
Yes.
So
Yes.
how do you think you overcome that?
Well, I'm very good at bringing it up with my friends and my partners in this project, and they are able to talk me down and explain to me what you just explained to me, and say that it doesn't really matter. I mean, I remember the manager of the club in Grand Rapids, Dr. Grins. He showed me, and this was early on while I
Dr.
was
Grins?
right. Yeah, while I was writing the Great Depresh. He's a chiropractor, I think. I don't think he's a medical doctor. Anyhow, doctor, it's voodoo. Dr. Grins, a person wrote on the comment card in all caps, "Don't talk about depression," with infinite exclamation points. And the manager felt the need to show me that at a time when I was still unsure of whether this was going to work in Middle America, for instance, Grand Rapids, Michigan. But then the meet and greet that I did, within minutes of that, everybody was so grateful. And I told the people in the line who said they were grateful, I said, one person wrote this, and I showed them the card, and they said, "Don't dare stop talking about depression. You need to get this out there." So that was very helpful, and a new approach, not just internalizing it and beating myself up and developing all kinds of insecurities and anger.
What I always tell myself with just writing is that if I'm not afraid at the moment that I'm about to hit publish, then I shouldn't publish it. Like, to be a little
That's
bit.
fantastic. That's a great tip.
And the reason it works is because if you're afraid, that means you're saying something that's gonna hit that
A
third
little
rail,
risky, yes.
and no one's ever written it before, so
Yes.
you're unique. But
Yes.
it's gonna mean you're gonna be polarized. Some people are gonna absurdly hate you,
Yes.
but most people will not hate
Right,
you as you
right.
get better, and you're at the top, so most people won't hate you.
Thank you.
But some people will, and I mean, I've had the worst hate mails over the past
Oh,
15
gosh.
years, but at least in terms of writing and book writing and stuff, you figure out how to get over it by telling myself that I asked for it, because
Right.
I know the people are gonna
Yes.
do it. But again, when you touch upon something that so many people feel, again, so many people feel it because they might be in the middle of it. They might not want to hear it out at a
Right,
comedy
that's
club,
true. Yes.
and then they'll get irrationally angry
Yes.
because they're still going
Yes.
through a mental illness.
Right.
That's the definition.
Yes. Yes.
So-
Yes. I mean, that's possible. It also could just be that that's not a topic they came to a comedy club to listen to. But again, I was lucky that there were a lot of people, even in Grand Rapids, that were there specifically to see me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when you did the classic abbreviated states. I hate
Yes.
to bring this
No,
one
no,
up.
no.
So now
I'm
you're
very
over it.
happy to talk about it. Yes.
But one clue about where you were heading is when Patton Oswalt wrote this beautiful Facebook post about your joke, and he's a great
Yes.
comedian for
Yes.
decades, and he was also massively depressed for various reasons. But uh, even your abbreviated states joke woke him up in terms of like this is what comedy is about, and so you
Right.
knew you were connecting at least
Yeah.
among comedians to that
Yeah.
type of audience as well.
Yeah. I mean, I remember reading that, and I was in the depths of depression at the time, and it did make me feel at least this one person that I admired and really looked up to enjoyed my work. Of course, I immediately went to what we had discussed that time, which is that's as good as I can do, and it's over because I was in such s- um, a brutal episode of, I called it writer's block. It wasn't writer's block. I just wasn't firing cognitively. My brain wasn't working. So because in October of 2017, when I started to feel better, since then I've written like 2.5 hours of material. So it was clearly I was just sick. I didn't have writer's block. That maybe that's not even a thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I always debate this, and in your Gulman tips, which we could talk about later,
Sure.
you've mentioned some ways I think are really powerful for getting over writer's block, whether it's comedy writing or other types of writing. But I also want to mention, by the way, in terms of your actual depression, how you got over it, I highly recommend people listen to the podcast you did with Brian Koppelman on
Yes.
his podcast is called The Moment.
Yes.
He's very close with you. His son's very close with you, and they describe what you had been going through even that summer, and you talk about how you got over it. You also talk about it on Conan, how you got
Yeah.
over it.
Yeah.
So people should absolutely listen to those interviews
Oh, thank you.
to get more of a glimpse on the depression and how you got over it. But I'm curious, way back, why'd you get into comedy in the first place?
Well, I I loved comedy since the first time I understood the joke, and I loved making people laugh at an early age, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately because people ask me about the relationship between depression and comedians and the cliche about comedians being more depressed than the average individual. But there probably is a hit of dopamine or serotonin or whatever other chemical makes you feel pretty good when you get a laugh from a stranger. And even the solving the puzzle of a joke. Sometimes when I figure out the ending or a nice turn of phrase when I'm writing, I get a little bit of a I wouldn't call it a high, but a feeling of well being when I solve a joke. So it's possible that I've sort of been self medicating through the laughter of strangers over the years, or at least augmenting my feeling through getting laughs from strangers. But I think it was a tip 2 days ago where I just said you need to try stand up. You need to do an open mic because it's exhilarating in a way that nothing else I've experienced has been exhilarating. There was one time when I was a freshman in college and I was playing football and they announced the team and I ran out through the tunnel and the crowd is going wild, and that was euphoric, and I wasn't even playing. So I imagine that athletes get that feeling. But the problem with the athletics is even the best, their prime is about 15 or 20 years. And I feel like I'm coming into my prime at 25 years in and 49 years old. So I think if I had a choice between athletic stardom and stand-up comedy competence, I would choose stand-up comedy competence.
Well,
Not that I just think I'm only competent, but I feel great even when I'm just competent. At this point, I'm like you've said, a superstar.
I think you were a superstar before, but now we'll talk more about that
Yeah.
evolution to the next level because I don't think comedy works like a what's called a bell curve where one comic is 10% better than
Right.
another. I
Yeah.
think there's it's like orders of magnitude. So one group of comedians might be 10 times better than the next group, might be 10 times better than the next group.
Oh,
I don't
that's
think there's
interesting.
like nuances where he's tiny little bit
Yeah,
better.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think there's like big jumps, and I think
Right.
you already had a not to throw too much praise at you. You already had a big jump, and then this one you could see like viscerally like what the jump was. But one thing I was gonna ask in terms of the doing comedy and the dopamine, it reminds me like if you were to write a book, it's not the same sort of dopamine hit. Like you get a deal to
Right.
write a book, a
Right.
year and a half later, the
Yeah.
book comes out after a grueling
Right.
12 months of writing it.
Right.
And then for 1 week, people, do little cheers
Right.
and you get
Right.
4 reviews on
Yeah.
Amazon and then that's it. And then you're home by yourself.
Oh gosh.
And with comedy, and this is related to the depression, I think when you're in that state, and I know when I was in my own issues, you have to find ways to use real life to self-medicate, like something you can do where there's instant feedback and stimulation. I think that's why a lot of it turns into addiction, like either alcohol
Yeah.
addiction, sex addiction, drug
Right.
addiction, because you get these
And
dopamine hits
food, I
right
mean
away.
I mean, a
Food.
dessert is a great hit of feeling good, yeah.
So comedy, you're right. You go up on stage, you say a joke, and a quarter second later,
Yes.
the dopamine hit's either
Yeah.
happening
Yeah.
or the worst cortisol ever is happening.
Yes.
And so you have to force yourself to get better to get those dopamine hits.
Right.
So, like, I remember, not to go too much into my story, but I remember one time I was unhappy for a variety of reasons, and so I slipped into my own weird addiction, which was I would play online chess, but
Uh-huh.
only the 1-minute variety. So each side gets
Okay.
1 minute,
Oh,
and
wow.
you lose if you run out of time, because
Yeah.
then it only takes at most 2 minutes to
Right.
get that. I'm either gonna win or lose. If I
Yeah.
win, great, I'm the best in the world. If I
Right.
lose, rematch.
Oh
And,
my word.
so
Yeah.
so now I would play 24 hours a day. It
Wow.
was a it was
But it's
nobody
safer
would
than
believe that it's a
gambling.
disease, but it was my girlfriend at the time thought it was a disease because I literally couldn't even go to the bathroom. I had to keep
Wow.
playing.
Oh my gosh, I've never heard of that. That's so interesting.
Yeah, but it was it was
Yeah.
it was not good. But now
Right.
it's an indicator for me. Like, if I do that
Okay.
too much, it
Right.
means something's off the rails.
Right.
So
No, that's a great indicator.
but
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you about an earlier point you made about, um, autobiography versus the other jokes you were telling. I still feel like let's take your Trader Joe's
Right.
before we get into the new stuff, your
Yeah.
Trader Joe's joke from several years ago, your last Netflix special, I believe it was in.
Yeah.
Um, uh that's still not quite autobiographical, but still your perspective
Right.
is unique to you and unique to who you are, and to some extent, that's your point of view, uniquely your point of view. It's not
Right.
like, let's say, the level below where they're just trying to figure out what to make the audience laugh. This was something that you found funny or annoying, and
Right.
and you figured out a way to write it and express it in a funny way. It was
Right.
still very uniquely you without being the story of your life.
Right. It
And
it
what's the
was a
difference is what I'm wondering.
well, it was a true story, or if it was a movie, you would say it was based on a true story, and it was it was helpful to me because it was the first time where I'd taken a story, and so I was probably doing it 21 years at that point, where I'd taken a true story from my life and told it on stage and made it work. I mean, there were other stories, but they weren't as long, and I didn't really bring in all my tools and all my skills and all my interests, and it was the I was at the height of my powers, and I was using everything I had learned in that, and also it was a new idea, which was if I believe in a joke, I am going to stick with it, and that I think led to me sticking with this joke that I had come up with in 1994, which was the abbreviated states. I'd come up with the premise a long time ago, and really never had the confidence or the skills do it. So I think while I didn't there's probably not a connection between talking about the meltdown I had at Trader Joe's and talking about the actual meltdown I had in my life. I think it gave me the confidence to tell a narrative and use that in my act. But one thing I wanted to discuss with you, because I had a thought about it, that there's this thing which is a little bit bothersome in stand-up comedy, where the audience doesn't laugh on a curve, right? They don't notice the degree of difficulty of your jokes. They don't know that writing a joke about depression is well, they may know it is, but they don't care that writing a joke about depression is harder than writing a joke about the airline food, for instance. But they'll laugh harder at the airline food than they will a mediocre joke about your depression. They don't laugh on a curve. But one thing I've noticed is that reviewers grade on a curve. They expect to laugh, I think, and but that's not the end all and be all. They really want to see you risking something and and having a higher degree of difficulty, jumping from the high dive board rather than just the side of the pool. Do you think that's accurate?
I don't know, because I see also reviewers lately affected by whatever side of the spectrum they're on,
Oh, okay.
and that's like take Chappelle's recent
Oh,
special.
right.
Whether you like it or not, you know, a reviewer would seem to like, for instance, a reviewer might say Chappelle's unfunny, ignoring the fact that everybody in the audience was laughing
Yes.
right in front of us.
Yes,
And the audience
right.
score on Rotten Tomatoes was 99%.
Yes.
So what I don't, maybe he thought it was unfunny, and that's fair. He's allowed to think
Right.
that, the critic, but to
Yeah.
say it was unfunny, like
Right,
that's the rule.
objectively, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's
doesn't
silly.
seem to make rational sense. You have to wonder, where is this irrational behavior from a professional writer
Right.
slash reviewer coming from?
Right.
Because it's not rational to think that way when everybody was laughing
Yes.
on the video.
Yes.
So, but I think, yes, to the other side of your point, I think they want to see funny and interesting, whereas
Right.
the audience, they'll laugh at a fart joke.
Right.
And so
Right.
the challenge is, let's say at a comedy club, you talk about the difference between performing in front of your audience of 1,000 versus doing 15 minutes in a comedy club of strangers. Comedy club they like the fart jokes and the airline jokes.
Yeah.
And they want to think they like the other jokes, but I think you have to work harder for it. Like,
Right.
I bet you that Trader Joe's joke you mentioned, that's the first story you that was really really happened, that you turned into a joke. That was a hard joke, because you're basically just talking about people angling for a better spot for their shopping cart.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
if you were to just say that, people would go, "Huh." Like,
Yeah.
but then you have to actually
Right.
take that "huh" and turn it into funny, and you did it really
Yes.
well. But I imagine that was hard.
It was hard. It took a long time, but I think, and this will come back to the Great Depresh. I think if I have one sentence that's funny to me and gets a laugh, then I will be unstoppable, because it'll be the thing that I'll build everything around, and I'll just keep gnawing away at it. So I didn't have one sentence to start the Great Depresh with. I had one joke, which was that and I didn't even mention it explicitly as being a symptom of depression at the time, but I had this one joke about having fork prints in your ice cream, and I knew it as a symptom of depression. And the interesting thing was, I never mentioned it in relationship to depression until I started working on what became the Great Depresh. It didn't have a name or anything like that. I just had this joke, and I think having that joke gave me the confidence every night to go out and workshop depression ideas, knowing that worst comes to worst, nobody laughs at anything. I am going to close with a great joke about fork prints and ice cream that I can guarantee nobody else on the show has done.
Right, because so that joke, which I first heard, you did a set on Colbert
yeah.
in 2017, I think.
Yeah, January of 2017,
and
in the midst of just crippling depression.
Right, and I think my guess is maybe not the audience, but Colbert immediately picked up on what you were doing, and he said, if you're, you know, Gary Gulman knows where you're coming from if you
Right.
experience this.
Yes.
So he
Yes.
picked up on that
Yeah.
wavelength, and I
Right.
think maybe getting that feedback plus the laughter plus you knew in your heart this was you had two compasses. You had the external
Right.
plus the authority validation and then
Yes.
your own. Like this was
Right.
a good joke. It was
Yes.
making people laugh. And I think
Yes.
it helps to have those compasses pointing you in
Definitely.
the direction of writing.
Yes.
So
Yes. I'm not one of these people who unequivocally believes in himself. I need people to corroborate it.
which is okay, because that's another benefit of telling jokes is that
Yeah.
you could tell lots of jokes and get lots of
Right.
feedback and see which it's like a massive focus group all the time.
Yes. Yes. But I think that's probably most people. Most
Yeah.
people don't have this unwavering belief.
A lot of bad writers probably do.
Right. Yes.
So
Bad
which they
writers
write something that
and
nobody
bad presidents.
Yeah. But I will say too on the abbreviated states joke, and we're just hammering this one because I don't want to give away too many spoilers on the Great Depresh, where every joke was unbelievable, and I will bring
Thanks,
up at
man.
least one joke from that.
Okay.
But on the abbreviated states one, I do feel there's you in that also. And you said you started working on it 1994. I think the first time I saw it on a YouTube clip might have been 2013 Conan.
Right. Yes. No. 2016. July of 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's 22 years.
Yeah.
We're gonna joke.
Yeah.
But there's like the guy, the omelet station chef.
Yes.
Okay, that guy is you. Right?
Well, the omelet station chef is me, but also the person who's afraid to upset the omelet station chef actually was me. There was a surly omelet station chef in 2003 in St. Thomas, and I wanted an omelet. I was on vacation, but I knew she didn't like making these omelets, and I refused to get an omelet for the entire week.
But here's the question: how did you know she did not want to make these omelets?
She was surly.
And you could probably relate. Like there's dreams, and then there's what
Yes.
happened. Then there's Plan B.
Yes.
And if you're in Plan B, you're
Yes.
probably not the
Yes.
happiest you thought you would be.
But the one thing we've learned from all these celebrity chef shows is that they are artists, incredibly temperamental artists. And I would be the chef who would be peering through the double doors at somebody's shaking salt on the food that I prepared and thinking they know the seasoning it takes better than I do. You haven't even tasted it. I would be outraged.
Right. So again, I'm always intrigued by, some comedians are very autobiographical, some are not, but everything they're saying is still uniquely theirs. So you still feel their perspective without them telling you the absolute truth. So
Yes.
like Kevin Hart in his autobiography, he talks about kind of his evolution. At first, he was telling jokes to make the audience laugh, so he'd make up these scenarios, and then I guess it was Keith Robinson told him, "Don't do that anymore." And so he went on the road, and he still is not talking about that much about his personal life, but he started telling jokes about things that were like you were annoyed at Trader Joe's. You had observations
Right.
on the line for the omelet chef. You weren't just saying, "Okay, this is what the audience is
Yes.
going to like it if I make
Yeah.
this airplane joke because they've experienced it, even though I've never been on an airplane or whatever."
Yeah.
You weren't telling those. You were still
Yeah.
telling your stories, but wrapped
Right.
in several layers of stand-up
Right. Well,
rapping.
it's really a matter of pronouns. The 80s comedian said, when you go to the grocery store, you do this, and then you switch it to I, and it changes everything in the writing, and it makes it original. And I'm not saying that's all you have to do is switch the pronoun. A lot of work goes into it, but that's essentially what gives it the spark. Is that it always irritated me when I would hear comedians say, when you go over there and you do this and everyone does this, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't, and the people are all laughing because you're a cult leader. Comedians have a position when they're charismatic of leading a cult, and they're going along with it, and a lot of times the comedian is lying to them.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. In order to get your perspective, into the joke, in order for the audience to feel this is your point of view as opposed to something that's just designed to make them laugh, I think you have to figure out where is your personal struggle in this joke. What,
Yes.
like she cut in front of me at Trader Joe's. don't, no, yes,
Yes.
you know,
Right.
and or even with the abbreviated states, you don't use I in that, but you feel as if you're in the room and you're kind of it's almost like you're working through the problem of how we abbreviate the states, and that's why we're along for the ride. So at least I feel that way. That
Yeah.
it's your perspective of all these different stories within that story. Um, that this story is also going to relate to one of your Goldman tips. But now, fast forwarding to the Great Depresh, October 5th, 10 p.m. Saturday. When do you feel the switch flipped and suddenly you were able to take your story, put in the punchlines, strip out the fat, make it funny?
Oh,
Because that was 25 years really in the
right.
I mean, when did you first try to tell a joke that was 100% true, and what happened?
Well,
Like, way back.
oh my gosh. I I'm not sure. I would have to think about it for a long time because I mean there was the Trader Joe's, and before that I guess in my first Tonight Show I told this story about, and this was true. It just became so hard for people to believe because I was very confident on stage, and I mean, without tooting my own horn, I'm objectively an attractive man. I have
Wait, you're a
I
superstar. You're an attractive man.
I
You're
have
running out on the
a
football field
strong
to massive
yeah.
applause.
I have a
How did you get
strong
depressed?
jaw and great hair. There's no way I should feel so lousy about myself. But so there was a story about a woman saying we were being romantic and kissing, and she said, "I want you." And I had a girlfriend in college, and we never had sex. So this person had said, "I want you," and I didn't know what that meant. And I told that story, and like you just said about you knew it was risky. I knew telling that was it felt risky because I was embarrassed by not knowing what that meant, and also being in a position where I was acknowledging that I wasn't much of a lover, and so I wrote a story around that, and then it became I had to drop it because people would tell me nobody believes that you had a hard time getting sex. So
Do you think that happens a lot with true stories? Because it's so true in your head, you can't imagine
right,
people not believing it. But when they're a total strangers listening to it, they're working off a completely different set of cues than
yes,
knowing your history.
yes,
And so I think that's why often for every comedian, it's almost like a slightly different skill set to turn those things into
right,
funny, as opposed to an observation which you know right off the top of your head. Man, that's funny if I could just figure it out.
yes. That's interesting because when I first started, I remember Brian Kiley, who's a writer for Conan and a comedian who's done stand up and hundreds of television appearances. But he told me that it was important to know how the audience perceives you. So he told me about a comedian friend of ours who would always have beautiful girlfriends, and he would tell jokes about sleeping with really ugly people, and Brian said that those jokes never worked for that guy, and yet he would keep doing them. And even if they were true, they weren't going to work. So it's important that you know how the audience perceives you, or go out of your way to reinforce that. I guess I could have tried. It was just interesting because I remember there was a manager who came to see me, and he said, "This thing where you're having trouble with women, that is not going to work, and you need to change that and go back to Boston for a couple of years." And within 6 months, I did the joke on the Tonight Show and got a deal based on my persona to make a sitcom with Fox for $250,000. So the guy was wrong, but he wasn't way off base.
Well, like, what do you think was your persona then, as opposed to when you were on the Tonight Show? Because I think when you are on stage, even before you left for Boston and dealt with the depression in the ways you
Yeah.
did, I mean, you would go up on stage and you would always seem, and it seemed like a persona, but you'd always seem like slightly nervous, slightly self-deprecating, but not too much. and like you had one joke I saw at the cellar where it might seem like a 6'6" uh Jew with great hair would not have would not also inherit all the neuroses of being
Yes.
Jewish,
Right.
uh and people laughed at that. So you built a persona where you were
Right.
allowed to
Yes.
be a little bit unreliable in who you were.
Right. Well, there's this idea that I learned about, and I think it might have come from Norman Lear or from the Mel Brooks era Sid Caesar's writing room, but the idea, it was called hang a lantern on it. If there's something that really doesn't make sense in your script or your joke, acknowledge it and point it out so that the
Ah,
audience doesn't feel they're being duped. So
so is-
so that might have been part of
well, well,
why I was able to make that work.
so let me ask you: does the broader sentiment of always call out what the audience is thinking, does that work or not really? So, like, if a spoon drops, do and everyone's looking at it, do you acknowledge it or like?
Well, for 25 years, I've tried to come up with something funny to say when a plate of glasses or plates, a tray of those things drops at a comedy club, and the other night it happened at the Comedy Cellar, and I screamed, "Don't let this ruin our night," and everybody laughed, and I thought, wow, after 25 years, I figured out how to handle this
But
situation that probably has only happened like 9
but
times.
that's also a personal perspective. Like, let's say I'm gonna start with the cliche. Like the cliche is now it's a party and everyone will give a slight chuckle because
Right.
we're all in
Yes,
on that cliche
yes,
together. But
yes, or
you
put that anywhere, but I refuse to use a stock line.
right, which is what I
Yeah.
appreciate in your Gulman tips. But in what you said, you it's as if you built a tribe with the audience, where
I
you're
guess so,
included,
yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
together.
yeah,
And maybe
yeah.
maybe you feel more comfortable doing that now that you've let the audience completely into your life with the jokes from the Great Depresh.
Yes. Yes, I think so. But there are still nights when I do shows where the people aren't there to see me, they're just there to see a comedy show, and I revert to some of my insecurities and my fears. It's I've figured out, and I often forget, but my therapist pointed out that the audience is my family. My family, when I was growing up, I would do a magic show, and my brothers would point out how I was doing my tricks, and it was very funny to everyone but me. Everybody was laughing, but I felt undermined and criticized, and I think I take a lot of that on the stage with me. So if somebody heckles, it's personal. When it's not personal, this person's just either drunk or an asshole.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah.
So, um, but when you again when the switch flipped open and now you could start talking about depression, what did it feel like? Because again, in that story with the girl and having sex, probably in your mind, what was funny is that you didn't know what she meant. That almost was
Yes.
like a punchline in your mind, but that's not
Yes.
like a punchline in real life.
Right.
But sometimes it's hard to translate those stories where what's funny to you just based on 23 years of history is funny in your mind.
Right.
They don't know that history. So how did you kind of make the leap to now, okay, this situation happened in my life. I'm going to take this situation. I'm going to figure out all the tools of comedy and how to make this funny. Like, can we take one joke from the Great Depression? And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've done it on YouTube, but I think you've done it on YouTube, but it wasn't played. It is sort of hidden somewhere. It's your hockey,
Oh, okay.
because
Yeah.
there's like really nice
Yeah,
wordplay plus
that didn't
self-deprecating.
right, that didn't make the Great Depress. That's cut out,
Oh, okay. I
but
saw it on stage though.
yeah,
Yeah.
I did it because we needed to put cameras behind me, and I wanted to make the audience be laughing at something when the cameras were behind me, because we couldn't really do the cameras behind me perspective during the show because it would have been distracting
I
and
I
look.
don't question your decision,
Yeah.
but why did just and well now you can say the joke, but why did you, given that it was a funny joke and it was a clever wordplay,
Yeah.
why did you take that out of the special?
I had to get it down to 62 minutes, and I didn't think it was I didn't think it was as on topic as the rest of it, and I also for a long time, I thought I'm never gonna write another great joke again, and so I didn't feel I wanted to hoard a good joke by putting on the special. It also gave me this idea that well, I'll put it on the next special, which is a really nice feeling.
So
Optimism.
can you talk can you talk about that joke,
Yeah,
or you want to
I
not?
mean the joke is one of my favorites to tell, and it basically is autobiographical, and it involves me talking about how poor we were, which is it's one of my favorite subjects, but it was something that I didn't want anybody to know about me because I didn't think it was important, and also I didn't want to embarrass my family or make them feel bad.
So you were afraid
I was
to
afraid,
tell it?
yes, and also there's this stereotype about Jews that I wanted to dispel, about that we're all rich and we're all very good with our money and
Shh, don't.
right, yeah. So I wanted to dispel that by talking about how poor we were growing up. We were on food stamps and free lunch and welfare, but there
I-
was this there was this just motto that my dad had, which was, if there's something you want, just ask for it. We'll try to find the money. But it was they wouldn't. They would, and I was aware of how precarious our financial situation was. My parents would argue about money on Sundays when my father would have to write out a check for that covered. My parents divorced when I was 1.5, so that he had an alimony, child support combination that was. If I give you the number, you'll laugh. It was so paltry what he had to write out every week for three boys and my mother's alimony. So at 7 years old, I was aware of the tax implications of alimony versus child support because I would hear my parents argue about this. Anyhow, I was in a hockey program. I really loved skating, and my father said, "Hockey has gone up in price.
Like
Do
a
you
stock.
It's really expensive this year. It was $50 last year. It's $200 this year. If you really want to play, we'll find the money." But he had already indirectly, and he didn't probably mean it. He was a nervous dad. He had already laid the groundwork for the guilt that would be involved in me playing hockey. It was like, yes, if you want to play hockey and you don't mind breaking your old man, play hockey. So there was no way I was going to play, but I had this idea that they would really lay it on thick, and I just exaggerated. And the point is that I wasn't that great at hockey, and I was very passive, and it's an incredibly brutal, violent sport, and I just love to skate. But anyhow, they pointed out that I didn't have great skill in hockey, and also that Jews as a whole have shown no aptitude for hockey. And then he said, "Let's examine the Hockey Hall of Fame." Now this never happened. I made this up. He said, "Let's examine the Hockey Hall of Fame. We'll count the Jewish players in the Hockey Hall of Fame." And of course there are none, which is, I mean, it's that's one of those things where you figure that out and a dopamine rush because you're like, I have the answer. I have a golden ticket, a great joke that I can do an entire Conan set on. And I haven't done it on TV yet. So I'm really excited to tell this on TV because it's one of my most guaranteed laughs. But he says, no Jews have made the Hockey Hall of Fame. Just for a point of comparison, Garry, more Jews have been the Messiah, which is like that. I mean, I knew that was it. Very rarely do you know a joke is going to work and then it works, but I knew that line was gold, man. That what a feeling that was. I just couldn't wait to get that one out there. It's just, yeah,
But
that's like
then,
having the winning lottery ticket and going to the lottery.
but I think that's like having the winning lottery ticket, and then the next line, it's like you won the lottery twice in a row. Do you remember you're more likely to walk on
walk on water than skate on it.
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't have that the first night I did
Okay.
it. Yeah, I riffed that one night because it came to me. I don't inspiration or just the confidence that getting a laugh gives you. You feel like you could say anything, and so the subconscious works. And
So I think, like like you say, you get a laugh at it because there's like so much wordplay, so much intelligence in it. Like you're more
oh,
likely to be the
thanks.
Messiah than to be in the
Yeah,
Hockey Hall of Fame.
yeah,
And then the wordplay of walking versus skating on water, and then but I think a lot of people could have just stopped at something relating to the guilt he was or
right,
you were already preparing for,
sure,
and had a kind of half joke to that. Like I don't know
right,
where it could have ended, but I think there would have
yeah,
been the inclination to just tell the true story and how you were worried about the guilt and make that
right.
just twist that in some small way.
Right, but it plays into all my obsessions in life, which is I'm obsessed with Jesus, I'm obsessed with religion, I'm obsessed with sports, and I'm obsessed with how poor we were. So everything came together. I mean, that's what happened there. That was one of my tips, that you should really embrace your obsessions, because that's where you get these really rich specifics and details, and these unusual, because there's this thing where you'll notice on Twitter, somebody will put out a joke there, and then 100 people will say the same type of thing in response to it, because they are not obsessed with something obscure. It's to be obsessed with something obscure is a real gift. Like your chess obsession, I imagine will come in handy at some point.
Although more people relate to not being the Messiah
Yeah,
than, oh,
yeah,
here's a chess player.
that's true. But I'm all at the same time obsessed with this sports excellence, and I can't stop thinking about Jesus.
Why do you think? First off, by the way, I'd written down a few of your Goldman tips. Number
Okay.
24, write down all your passions,
Yes.
and because that one I think is really important because that's where you're willing
Passion
to.
of the Christ.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yes.
you have this passion of the Christ. You're gonna
Yes.
go down. There's so many ways to go down the rabbit hole and find jokes from it that I really like that tip. That's tip number 24. You're doing a tip a day
Yeah.
from January 1st to December 31st. That was the January 24th, I guess.
Right.
Um, and I like it because again, it's this way of taking your true story, but then combining it with a passion to allow you to make up something that's still important to you and slightly out of the comfort zone of the listener.
Yes, like
It,
look at what Hannah Gadsby did with her information and knowledge, her mastery of art in the Van Gogh Picasso joke. I mean, I was never coming up with that because I wasn't obsessed with Van Gogh and Picasso, and it's just such an important joke.
yeah, and I think again, you're if when you're passionate about something, you're able to see nuance. It kind of quadruples the number of observations you can make because you
Yes.
can there's so many observations you can make in that and then layer it like you I think a lot of comedy and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just throwing this out there. A lot of comedy is taking two completely disparate points in space and time and connecting them. So you
Yes.
connected
Making
you,
connections is almost everything.
right.
Yes.
So you connected your dad's kind of guilt trip on your hockey with
Right.
Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that's going to be amazing. And you could only do that if you were, why were you passionate about Jesus?
Well, it's so irritating that growing up I was not allowed to really bring up Jesus or Christmas, and we were afraid of. I remember when one of the popes died, the one before John Paul died, and I knew that it was an important thing because it was on every channel, and we didn't have any news channels. It was just on every network channel, and I loved to report important things to my mother, and I remember I had told her that Elvis had passed away, and then I had this period where I knew that I would get a reaction, so I kept telling her famous people had died.
You knew your audience.
Yes.
That was your dopamine hit. Richard Nixon
forgot,
died.
I forgot all about that. I said, I knew she loved the actor Robert Redford, and I went up to her and I said, "Ma, Robert Redford died," and she was heartbroken. And I said, "Oh, I made that up." And she was so angry.
Oh my
But
God.
anyhow, the Pope really died, and I went to my mom
After a month, right? This was like the Pope that was around for a month. I think it was
Yeah,
John Paul the first.
yeah,
So,
and I said, "Ma, the Pope died." No, this was the prior Pope because
okay,
this
like
was a
Paul
Pope that
something.
everybody had become attached to.
Yeah.
Okay, it wasn't Pope Obvious. I said, I said, "Ma, the Pope died." And she yelled at me. She said, "Do you realize how angry you could make Christian people by saying that?" She didn't say Catholic. I remember she said Christian. And I think she should have said Catholic, because the Christians might not be as upset, but the Catholics definitely would be upset. "Do you realize how angry you could make?" And I said, "No, turn on the channel. It's true." "Well, don't tell anybody that. They don't want to hear it from a Jew." And so all my interest in Jesus and Christianity and popes and all those things, it felt very illicit. Like that was my Playboy collection, was gathering information from my friends about CCD, and I remember seeing a crucifix at a house, and it was highly articulated, this crucifix, man. I mean, it was gory, and I just remember being totally blown away by this. And then the twist of this mystery was when I found out that Jesus was Jewish, just like me. That was like, are you kidding me? This hero and the most famous person on earth is also a Jew. Why aren't we not embracing this? This is huge.
Because you were young, so I don't know what your religious background was, but did you view, like, you were reading comic books, probably, did you view Jesus as like, this is a real superhero? Like,
Oh my gosh,
Superman
yes.
doesn't exist, but Jesus
Right.
existed, and
Yes.
was just as powerful.
Yes, more powerful than any of these superheroes. And he's a Jew, and his interpretation of, I would learn later on, his interpretation of the Bible is much gentler than the Old Testament angry, wrathful,
Kill
jealous
every woman and child.
God. Oh my gosh, his treatment of Sodom and Gomorrah. Listen, they were experimental, and they were doing all these things, but I was always horrified by the definition of sodomy, and that this definition was how God decided to smote an entire society based on their sexual predilections. It was really.
I could see the religious special. But
yeah, I did want to do this before I got sick. I was working on this thing about my religious obsession, and Jason Alexander from Seinfeld was going to direct it, and then I got sick, and the worst email I ever had to write was to tell him I couldn't continue to work on it. He was so thoughtful and so nice and understanding and patient in the message, and he said he was really surprised, because he said you seemed so light. Yeah, it was so nice.
You told me about this actually on our very first podcast, and again, like, barely above a whisper.
Yeah.
And you were red.
Yeah.
Like, I thought you were going to cry then, talking about Jason Alexander.
my
like, you
gosh,
couldn't even get out of bed to
Right.
work on this amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll get back to it.
Right. I hope so. But the thing is that the part of the depression is you feel yourself blowing all these opportunities. So I probably should have said no thank you to Colbert that time, because I was so sick, but I didn't want to blow an opportunity, because I managed for the Conan appearance, and it was really important. You always have this. When you're first starting out, you have this feeling, oh, this thing could break me. And then you have more shows, and you're like, oh, it didn't break me. This probably won't either. So by the time I did Conan, I didn't think that it would be such a big deal. But I found out recently that it's had 30 million views, which is insane.
Yeah, because this is why people also, from the very beginning, have been obsessed with the Gulman tips. Hashtag Gulman tip on Twitter.
Right.
Because your joke writing skills is like, I feel like every comedian's got their superpower in the league of special comedians, and
thanks.
like, the writing is so layered and amazing.
Thanks.
And then again, we haven't revealed any spoilers from the Great Depresh special, but I still, like, when you sat down to write, would you again pick a story? Like you have in one of your tips, which I think is a really great tip, and it's sort of about writer's block, which is, it's tip number 269. If you're having trouble writing a joke, just write a funny sentence. It's kind of like, give yourself permission to let it flow and even be bad, and then you start playing with it. Like, what would you do? Would you write out, like, okay, here's some aspect of my depression. You write it out, what was funny to you, and then start to.
Right.
How would you then take those words and craft it?
Well, I would start with a sentence, and I'm pretty sure I did this tip, but one thing I learned fairly early on in my writing was that you may be tempted to write 9 or 10 pages on this new joke that you think is going to be so great, but you'll be really invested in this joke, and when you go on stage and do it and it doesn't get a laugh, you're going to be devastated, and you will have felt like you wasted a lot of time. You haven't, but I know myself. I'm gonna feel terrible and foolish and dumb. And so just maybe write for 9 pages, but just pick one sentence that you really believe in and go up there and tell that one sentence. And then if that sentence works, and this is the key, if you only take one tip, then write the 9 pages off that sentence, because you have everything you need. You have this um, place to start. This foundation is the word I'm looking for. You have a foundation to build your entire home off of. But the other thing that I will say that is a master level tip, that it's actually the first tip about listening to your sets. But at this point, I don't so much write as I do write down. So I've gotten to a place now where I've written enough and performed enough that I can flush things out on stage. And I might be thinking about something I actually wrote down, but sometimes I'm just thinking about what comes to me next. And so I'm basically writing on stage, but then, and the hardest part is listening to that and then writing down what you say. So really what I do is I'm not so much writing as writing down. And then when I write that down, then I think, well, you came up with that line about the Messiah, and you came up with that line about the skating on walk on water, then skating on water, and then I try to write down other sentences, and in that case, I found that just repeating the premise, "We'll try to find the money," and then I wrote down, "We'll try to find the money, Jesus," like they're being sarcastic, like they're being so cruel, and I thought that was really funny and a nice way to tail off and the joke, and then yeah, so that's it took me at least 10 years to get to the point where I felt comfortable writing on stage. Also where I was getting enough stage time where I could, and by stage time I mean literally the minutes of amount of stage time that I could do. I was allowed to do 20 minutes or a half hour, an hour, and work out these things, and I didn't have to get everything in 5 minutes and kill, so that I'd be invited back to the club and to build a buzz so that I could get more work elsewhere.
I bet you get this a lot about your tips, which is, I wish you had told me this 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
So, because like just the writing the 9 pages in my massive 4 years of experience now,
Yeah.
I there was a particular show where you had to tell stories about LSD. That was the premise,
Oh,
and I had
wow.
never done anything. I had to
gosh.
just make this up,
Yeah.
and so I did. I wrote like 5 pages, recasting the entire 9 movies of Star Wars
Oh,
from the point
wow.
of view of Luke Skywalker having a bad acid trip,
It's a
and
great
this
idea.
homeless guy
Yeah.
says, "Dude, your dad's
Yeah,
ruler of the
It's
galaxy,"
brilliant.
and
Yeah.
he's just a farmer,
It's a
but
great
like he's this
idea.
white trash farmer.
Yeah.
And but then two things happened. One, nobody else on the show did LSD jokes; like they just completely ignored the premise of the show.
Wow.
And B, no one in the audience had seen Star Wars.
Oh my
But I
gosh.
still
What a
did.
bummer.
I still did my 5 pages when I should have probably done the one sentence to kind of feel
No,
it
you
out.
definitely should have done the 5 pages. That's a great premise.
So-
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we'll see, because I realized after that only people I know have watched every detail of Star Wars.
Right.
But
Yeah. It's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the other thing I want to mention about your special, it's got I don't usually see this in a special. It's got this whole documentary portion.
Yes.
So how did you decide to do that? Was very interesting. And how do you decide to do that?
I think that we believed at the time that I was never going to get, or I believed at the time that I was never going to get 60 minutes of material about depression. And how was I going to hold an audience's attention for 60 minutes talking about something that was it could be a real bummer. So I had about 20 minutes of depression material in my recovery, and jokes about that and stories about that. And my manager, this man named Brian Stern, said, "Well, why don't we do a hybrid of a special where you do the jokes, but also we interview you and Sade, your wife, and maybe we could get." I said, well, maybe we could get my psychiatrist to do an interview and explain my treatment and things. And he said, "Great, when you're ready, I'll introduce you to this director." And so he introduced me to a director named Mike Bonfiglio, who had done most recently, he had done the Garry Shandling documentary
Oh, okay, with Judd Apatow
with
as the
Judd
producer.
Apatow, yes. And so we met and we told him the idea, and he said, "Well, I don't know what percentage of documentary versus stand-up we should do, but the more stand-up, the better, because you're not hugely famous, and people aren't going to tune in just to see the documentary of somebody who's not super famous. That seems to be the trend now. So why don't you work on your hospitalization, this treatment that you did, which was electroconvulsive therapy, which we felt hadn't been really touched by a lot of stand-up comedians over the years, and work on jokes about that." And he said, "You know, it would be interesting if the first time you try out jokes about electroconvulsive therapy, we film that and we show it, and then we show the final product in the special." He says, "I don't think I've ever seen that before." And I said, "Well, if you've never seen that before, then that's what we must do, because in an age when everything has been done, probably even that, we should try to do that." And he said, "And you know what? If it doesn't work, we don't have to use it, but let's try." And it worked, and we did it. So the idea came from my manager to do a hybrid, and I came up with some of the ideas, and then the director really helped me build the narrative. I mean, unlike any other director I've ever worked with on my previous 3 specials, he listened to every set I did from the road and went and saw me live. And I remember there was one night in New Brunswick, New Jersey, at the Stress Factory, where it was a Thursday night, and it was a full audience, and they were fans, I guess, but it was New Brunswick, which it seems the people were not dressing their best. So a lot of people were wearing shorts and their hats backwards, and they looked like people who were not going to respond to jokes about depression and anxiety
Hey,
and
I grew up in New
hospitalization.
Brunswick.
Okay, this is very interesting. So
The Stress
they,
Factory was the comedy club.
yeah, it's an incredible comedy club. And so Mike said to me, "If you don't feel like doing it in front of this audience, and it's going to make your confidence waver, then just maybe do your regular act." And I said, "No, I need to try it. And if it falls apart, then I'll go into more reasonable jokes." And the audience was on board from the start, and it
That's
killed.
great.
And that was the night we knew we had something that was going to reach a broad audience.
So Gary, I want to be respectful of your time.
Oh, thank you.
You have a busy next few days.
I do have a busy next few days, which,
and
I'm very grateful for, but also a little stressed.
yeah, from the first time you were on the podcast to now, it's been such a great arc to see, and I'm so glad I watched the taping, but I'm also looking forward to actually seeing it on HBO. So again, The Great Depresh, HBO, October 5th, 10 p.m. And I just want to mention also, you got to check out Gary's Gulman tips. I just wrote down a few that meant a lot to me. Your number 15, write out an old joke maybe, but keep space in between each word so you could see if there's other jokes or
Right.
words you could put in is brilliant, is helpful for any writing. Starting with a funny sentence kind of is like this writer's block cure. I liked, and I'll just make this very clear. I liked your tip 271 about go in front of what you call the nurturing audience, but like an audience who's familiar with
Yes.
you, because then
Yes.
you can. It's good to when you're learning any skill, it's good to isolate like freeze some sub skills so you can focus on other skills. So if you knew
Yes.
the audience is your friend, You don't have to
Right.
work about that. You don't have to worry about that skill, and you can focus on maybe the exact timing or the wording
Right.
or stage presence, whatever. Gives you more chance to isolate and learn skills. Um, and then I liked your tip 26 combined jokes. My guess is
Yes.
for the abbreviated jokes, that's
Oh my
probably how
gosh,
over
so many
22 years.
jokes. So many jokes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
the Great Depresh. I
Well,
want
let
everyone to
me
see it.
before we close, let me just say your encouragement and support over the years has meant so much to me. You've
Oh,
been
thanks, Garry.
somebody that I could rely on to give me some objective commentary on what I'm doing, and I respect your opinion because you have great taste in things and in people. So thank you for that. I'm truly grateful for your friendship and your help.
Thanks, Garry. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that, and have fun the next few days.
Okay,
Don't
thanks,
be too
James.
stressed. This
All
is a
right.
party.
No, I'll be fine. Yes, thank you.